Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us, for hanging out with us, for spending your lunch break with us. I am beyond thrilled to have you all with us today. This event is really a dream come true for me in so many ways. As I was getting ready to launch the Embodied podcast almost a year ago, I was spending a ton of time thinking about hard conversations and who was having hard conversations out in the journalism and podcasting space that was doing the work that I admired. People who were talking about bodies and sex and pleasure and difficult topics. And what advice did they have for me before I dove into this work? And two of the people that I reached out to help prep me for doing Embodied are joining me today to have conversations about having hard conversations. They are journalists that I feel a lot of kinship with. They are deep thinkers, thoughtful listeners, and folks who approach storytelling with curiosity, empathy, and nuance. I am really thrilled to introduce both of them to you now. Anna Sale is the host of Death, Sex, and Money. She launched that podcast 7 years ago this month. And if you haven't listened, it's hard to describe how you'll feel, but I'll just say that some of the episodes have made me laugh, some have made me cry, some have made me ugly cry and laugh at the same time, which is really, really ugly. But there's so much good fodder in there. And I'm so excited for y'all to learn more from Anna. She just wrote a book called Let's Talk About Hard Things, which you can see in the background of her video. It came out yesterday. And Anna, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Also with us is Alison Behringer. Alison is the creator and host of Bodies. It's a feminist documentary podcast, and it's so beautifully done. It really starts every episode from the place of acknowledging complexity, and that all of us who live in a changing body are living in a messy body, and the ways that our bodies intersect with the world are messy and complicated. And Alison really dives through and explores all of that in her podcast. Alison, welcome.
Thanks, excited for this.
So before we dive in, a few quick housekeeping things. If you are with us today and you are not a host of a podcast about hard conversations, please make sure your mic is muted and your camera is turned off. We're going to be taking your questions throughout the conversation today, and we're going to jump in and take those a couple of times. So feel free to put those in the Q&A box and know that we're going to get to you before the end. We're going to keep coming back to those questions and have them drive some of our conversation. In case it tells you that your question is dismissed, this is a weird Zoom function. It does not mean that we've dismissed your question. It means that our producers have acknowledged it and are going to pass it on to us. You can also use the chat if you want to just respond to what you're hearing. Our producers are in there and happy to engage with y'all throughout the conversation as well. There is closed captioning at today's event. So if you press the button marked CC at the bottom of your screen, you can activate that closed captioning. And today's event is being recorded. So if you know someone who RSVP'd that wasn't able to make it, or if you have to dip out early, know that anyone who RSVP'd will get a link right at the end of the show. So we're going to break up this hour today into 3 parts. We're going to talk a little bit at the beginning about conversations that we've had about sex and bodies with people that we're not used to talking about these topics with. Then we're going to talk about hard conversations we've had with friends, partners, former partners, people a little bit closer in our proximity that we're maybe a little bit more used to having uncomfortable conversations with. And then we're going to end talking about some of the ongoing challenges that we all have, having these hard conversations, lessons we've learned, and hearing from y'all throughout. So Anna, I'd love for you to start us off. You just published this book yesterday, so you've been thinking a lot about having hard conversations with folks in your life on and off the microphone. And I'd love to start by talking about sex in particular.
Okay.
Let's just get right into
it.
So tell us about one of the hard conversations you've had about sex with someone that maybe you weren't used to talking to sex about, and how that conversation went.
Yeah, well, I write about this in my book. I mean, the thing with hard conversations, sometimes you can sort of think about it ahead of time, plan the timing and how you want to open the conversation, prepare yourself. And that's, of course, my preference as somebody who likes to be prepared. But I had a conversation once when I was going for my annual OBGYN exam where I was just like not expecting a hard conversation about sex. I have Kaiser healthcare. I live out in California. So sometimes that means I have these like rotating doctors. And this one doctor's appointment, I had this male OBGYN whom I never met before. And it was about, probably about a year after my first baby was born. And soon after I had my first baby, I got an Nexplanon arm implant, birth control, long acting birth control. And I was like, I'm thinking like I should probably get this out. We want to have a second kid. Like, when should I do that? And then I just like made it that a sort of like, but ching joke, like, not that we've needed it that much, because we had a baby, right? And what he did was so graceful. He was just like, well, let's talk about that. Like, what have you noticed about how your sex life has changed since you've become a parent? And I was like, also because he had acknowledged that he was a Death, Sex, and Money listener prior to saying that. So I was like, do this, Anna. You can prove you can do this.
You can't pretend like you don't know how to talk about
I was like, okay. I was like, well, sometimes you're just tired, finding time, like you're so, the whole thing. And he's like, well, maybe you could talk about that with your partner and just sort of like talk about redefining what intimacy might look like. And he was like, and also, I know it sounds really like clinical and boring, but scheduling sex can also be a really useful tool and can help you sort of like gear up for it, like get the energy reserved. And it's sort of, we just sort of like, and he's like, all sex doesn't need to end with orgasm. It can be whatever, just closeness. And I was like, oh, okay. And then he ended and he was like, because I just want to, if you're talking about having a second baby, if you're going from like no sex or rare sex to trying to have a baby sex, like that can be a lot of pressure, especially for second pregnancies. And I was at this point, maybe like 36, 37. So not a young woman for trying to get pregnant. And I just so appreciated that like reminder of just like, oh, like we don't need to make this there's a way we can make this easier on ourselves. And so I went home and I talked to my husband, Arthur, and I was like, I had a conversation with my new OBGYN last night, or get this today. Let me tell you about it. And I was, just sort of like scheduling, what do you think? What do you find you need? What do I need? And it like led me to sort of be like, what I think I'm kind of could use more of myself right now is just like, I really love skin on skin. Like skin on skin is something I talk a lot with babies, like, when you're that bonding. I was like, I just want also some more skin on skin time. So the doctor, like by inviting me in, because he like didn't let me just sort of be dismissive and like make fun of myself for feeling like a cliche. Instead, he was like, let's talk about this new phase that you're in. It was wonderful. And I just think, oh my gosh, if more healthcare providers could just like when they see those little windows, if they rush in and say like, do you want to talk about this more? He was so skillful and I really loved that.
It's awesome that he also brought up, like, acknowledge that people have sex for so many different kinds of reasons or search for intimacy for so many different kinds of reasons. So kind of like got you out of that framework of just like sex for baby, will body allow me to do that. Like acknowledge that exploring is important.
Yeah, that sex is a spectrum, like, and you can want different things at different moments from the sex that you have with your partner. And that's totally cool. Like you can communicate that. Like that's also was really helpful.
Anna, do you have, does that bring up anything for you?
For me?
Wait, I'm sorry, Allison. Okay. Both A names. We're all three A names. I'm sorry, Allison. Does that bring up anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think so with with bodies, I talk to a lot of people who are recounting their health stories. So a lot of like interactions with doctors. And I feel like that's something that comes up again and again is like oftentimes the moment where they finally are able to talk to their doctor about what's going on or have a sympathetic ear is when the doctor can just ask an open-ended question and then listen like that. The listening part, I feel like is what is what I'm hearing here too, Anna, with your
Yeah.
situation. I feel like that's a huge part of it too.
Yeah.
Allison, I know
Did you
both
see
of
that
us.
OBGYN? Oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
I was going to ask if you had a follow-up with that, Dr. Anna.
I saw him one other time, and like another time he was like, let's just take a minute and just make sure your whole health history is filled out in the electronic medical records. And like, he just did the thing. Tell me about your aunt, what happened with your uncle, da, 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 da. So thorough. And by those 2 visits, I was like, he's my new best friend. I only want to see him ever, 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 ever. He's my doctor. And then of course he was so skillful and great. He got promoted to a different role and was somebody I could see for just regular visits. And I said to a nurse, a scheduling nurse, I was like, oh, I'm really excited for him, but I will miss him. She's like, oh, we all love him. I was just like, oh, this guy is a total champion, not just with me, but with like his coworkers. And yeah, he was wonderful.
I love it. I know one of the things that we've talked about a lot on Embodied, and I've thought a lot about, is the difference between, like we were mentioning, like a sex talk that's focused on how to have it and how to have it safely, and a sex talk that's focused on pleasure and advocating for yourself and getting what you want. And Allison, I know that was something that you were thinking a lot about with Bodies, and even posed to your mom. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So, the first episode of Bodies is my own personal story, and it was the inspiration for the show. And in short, basically, I was in my mid-20s and in this relationship, and all of a sudden, sex became painful. And I couldn't figure it out, went to different doctors, was kind of dismissed, like, oh, pain is kind of normal, just use lube. And then it was actually through a friend and talking to her, and she told me she had had painful sex for many, many years, and that it turned out to be the birth control pill. And this kind of blew me away because I had never known about any side effects of the birth control pill, really. And that kind of got me down this road of going to the same doctor she had, figuring out that it was indeed the birth control pill. It was a hormonal birth control pill that was causing the painful sex, and then looking into the history of the pill and the science of it and all that. But what I kept coming back to throughout the episode and like making it and like going through the experience was how, it wasn't just about pain. I think that, the episode, I also talk about my relationship with my, then boyfriend. And I think one recurring thing in our relationship was like, it wasn't really about my pleasure. And I think that's as much as like my own upbringing or my own inability to talk about it at the time. And also like his, our relationship. So that was kind of a thread running through. And I just felt like growing up, I hadn't had conversations with my mom about pleasure and like how, both partners should be having pleasure. And I think we get a lot of messages in our society. They're very like male pleasure focused. And so at the end of the episode, end of the reporting, I ended up actually talking to my mom. And I was home in Maryland visiting, and we were sitting in my childhood bedroom and, still painted like this horrible, like pastel green that I had when I painted it when I was 14. And so I, kind of opened the question to my mom. I was like, look, like you've been a great mom, you're a great parent, but, I'm just like, why don't you ever talk to me about pleasure and like how I should consider my own pleasure and advocate for my own pleasure? Like we talked about, like, don't get pregnant and, have sex with someone you really love, but what about that other stuff? So you're about to hear a clip that plays at the very end of the episode where I kind of put that question to my mom, like, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me how to, find pleasure in sex?
Awesome. Okay, let's listen.
We never had that conversation, and I feel like it's taken me until my mid-20s to like start thinking that way. Why didn't you ever tell me that?
That's an easy answer, because one is you only know what you know, and I didn't have any information to give you. My mother never talked to me about it, and I grew up in a very strict Catholic family, and you didn't advocate for yourself. I didn't know that you were supposed to advocate for yourself. And as a mother of a teenager, The goal was to make sure you didn't get pregnant. You're lucky. You learned in your 20s, took me to my 50s. So
We talked for almost 30 minutes.
I didn't have any information.
Trying to think if I have any other questions. I think that's it. Thanks, Mom.
You're welcome.
I put the microphone down.
Like I said, only knew what I knew.
Yeah.
Take off my headphones.
Why are you getting emotional?
I don't know.
Why are you getting upset, Mama?
Because sometimes I feel like I failed you in that department.
Mom. Oh.
Well,
Mom. It's okay. No, you didn't fail me. That's silly.
yeah, but why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me? Well, I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
I mean, Kathy was the one that told me that, you could rub your clitoris while you were having sex. I'm like, what? Oh, I don't know.
When did she tell you that?
I don't remember. I had to be married in 20s or 30s or something like that.
You did a really good job. I'm serious.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
I love you.
I know you do.
Oh.
So wonderful. I love that moment.
Tell us about that. What was that like?
Yeah, so I mean, it was, I kind of had two brains going, like my producer brain, which was like, got to make sure I get the good tape, got to make sure I turn the microphone back towards myself. And then the other half of me, which was just like me, human Allison, like being in the midst of having this like really intense conversation with my mom. And then, she like gets upset at the end and feeling like, man, I'm kind of a jerk kid for being like, Mom, it's your fault. You didn't tell me about this. Like, why didn't you tell me? But it's interesting because, the first episode, we like have that, serious conversation, and that what made it on the episode. But it was pretty cool because like pretty much every other episode that we've done for Bodies, we did one about breastfeeding, and I called my mom. I was like, what was your breastfeeding experience like? And then we did an episode about menopause, and I actually interviewed her again and kind of flipped the script of being like, Mom, you went through menopause. I was like totally absent doing my own thing. I didn't ask you about this. So I think probably all three of us have been really lucky in that our jobs have been a way in for us to have these conversations. Like we kind of got to cheat. Like it's easier in some ways, I think, to be like, oh, I'm producing this. So that's why I'm asking these hard questions. Yeah.
I think I've also talked to my parents for a lot of the episodes of the Embodied podcast. And I'm going to play a clip from a couple of conversations we had about sex. But hearing what you're talking about, Allison, is like, I think for me, I've gotten more and more comfortable like turning that radio brain off. But I think I've also learned a lot about like where I think with people that I know really well, I'm maybe less likely to like really set the table for the conversation. And so with my parents, sometimes I'll give them like a really broad, like, we're going to be talking about this, but I don't tell them like the specific questions. And sometimes it's been great. Like, I think with what you'll hear, like when I asked them about their experiences with porn, there was like so much in like an element of surprise, but there have been moments where that has gone really wrong. And I feel like I've had to learn a lot about like care. I mean, not learn a lot about care, but like taking care of people that you're talking to on the microphone. And like, there are times where I have not done that. I have not set the table in a way that gives them a sense of like where we're going to be going with the conversation. So let me play a quick clip from the two conversations I had with them about sex. So one of them was for our episode about pleasure. And I asked them why they had never given me the sex talk. And then the second was an episode about porn. And this, I had zero idea what was going to come out when I asked this conversation, but I asked if either of them have had experiences with porn. So yeah, here are my parents answering those two questions.
Go for it, Dad.
I think it is very much a cultural thing. If I had to learn about sex when I was growing up, it was almost impossible.
My parents also didn't tell me anything. No sex talk, period, nothing. I think we didn't do, if it's one area where we were lacking, we were totally lacking in that area. Because we did not have the example that it was something we didn't talk about.
If you could have the sex talk today, how would you start the conversation?
I think you would really talk first by explaining how a human is actually conceived.
I've heard about the magazines. You've seen that in the stores. But apart from that, I have not been exposed to porn. I mean, I've not looked for it. I'm not interested. You know what? I'm telling a complete lie. This is kind of random, but this is the only exposure I've had. Dad asked me to go to a shop in Iowa City to get something because he wanted to. Do you remember that, Satish?
Yes.
So I totally have been inside a store, but for an errand for Dad, for a medical-related errand.
For a medical-related errand?
That was it.
Dad, any reflections?
So I think my first exposure to porn was in England. This is our small group of friends, about half a dozen of us. We prepared for the exams, and fortunately we all passed. And so the way we wanted to celebrate was to go and watch a porn movie. And that's what we did.
You did? I didn't know this.
Yeah, I never told you.
Wow.
and so on. And that was my first and last true experience to actual porn itself. I don't think I've had much exposure.
Oh, I just think your parents love you, Anita, and are supporting you in such beautiful ways. Every time I listen to them on your show, I'm like, yes, these such incredible parents.
They really are. And it's been so fun to watch. I mean, they've truly become the celebrities of the show because they just say the wildest things when the microphones are on. But there was a recent example. So I was talking about setting the table. So we had a conversation for a recent episode about abortion. And I had told them that we were going to be talking about abortion, but I didn't really specify what I was going to ask, or that I was going to be asking them about personal experience, not the intellectual conversation about abortion. And it was not comfortable for any of us. And it was a very good lesson for me of learning how to prepare people for having hard conversations and making sure that they don't feel caught off guard and surprised in a bad way. Cause I think that can be hurtful and challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Do y'all feel like you've, in terms of conversations about sex, do you feel like you have lessons that you've learned that you want to take away into your own, Anna, I don't know, about talking to your kids about sex? Do you have thoughts?
Well, I have a couple of different things I want to say. First of all, I think what you're talking about, there's the journalistic question that you're pointing to, which is when you have a surprise question when you're in the course of doing journalism, then what you do when someone is actually, this isn't what I want to talk to you about while it's being recorded on tape for public consumption. That's one thing. But then even, if you just think of it as a personal hard conversation, I also think that's something to think about. And I thought about a lot with writing the book is how I both wanted to encourage people to lean in and try to talk about stuff that's hard and tender and out of the ordinary and dig in, but also to be quite mindful that you may run into other people, the person you want to talk to's boundaries, and they might say, no, this is private. I actually am not ready to talk to you about this, or I'm not going to talk to you about this. And respecting those boundaries is also part of the really important relationship that you're trying to tend to with a hard conversation. I would say with my own kids, they're so little, but I got some advice from a sex educator early on with how she sort of talked about sex and bodies with her two little boys. And really sort of core was the idea of what's private and what's public. And anything that's private is something you get to tell, decide who sees it, and also get to decide who touches it, And so I just, even watching like a pediatrician now, I've had really great healthcare experiences at Kaiser Oakland, I will say. Like the pediatrician, it's very young. Like, is it okay if I look at your body now? Like, look at your body under here. Like, really, even at that age, kind of like reinforcing that this is a consent issue when it comes to private areas. And I just really love that framework, because then it's like, yes, it's great to be open and comfortable with the sexual parts of ourselves. Also, it is different than the public parts of ourselves. It's private, and you can decide how and when and who you want to share that with.
Allison, we got a question in the Q&A that I'm going to put to you that kind of pivots off of that. So this is from Lily, who says, my question is how you as hosts decide to open up your personal lives for a podcast, especially as journalists who are trained to be objective. How do you think about objectivity and the line between personal and professional? Allison, do you want to take that one when it comes to especially this issue of like personal hard conversations like the one you had with your mom?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I certainly don't have the answer to it. I feel like it's something that we wrestle with on the team and I've thought about a lot. But first of all, I think objectivity is like, who is the arbiter of what is objective? And I think that kind of restriction of like, oh, I have to be objective is kind of limiting. I think that in the example of my own story with hormonal birth control, I felt like I had this experience. There was something that needed to get out there. Media was not really covering the side effects of hormonal birth control. And I felt like my personal story was a way to get that information out. And connected to what you were saying, Anna, there's certainly a lot that I did not put in that episode. People be like, oh my gosh, you put everything in there. But I'm like, there was a lot I left out. There was, as much as I did put a lot of personal details in there, but there was also a lot I left out. I think less about the line of like objectivity and subjectivity, but more about like the personal and professional. And I think there is a line there for sure.
Okay, I want to share the results of our poll if I can. So we asked you all to talk about, to characterize the sex talk that your parents gave you. Dang, okay, a lot of people vote as me. A lot of people did not get any sex talk. Any parents listening, give your kids sex talk if it's going to be good. Disturbingly comprehensive.
Love the disturbingly comprehensive.
That's so interesting. My choice isn't there. Mine wasn't disturbingly comprehensive, but it was like very concrete and factual when I was young. And then that was it. So it was sort of like between disturbingly comprehensive and too little, too late. It was early, but it wasn't like full of misinformation, which is good.
And you didn't necessarily get, well, like both of what y'all are talking about is like, I think we also forget that like, obviously our relationship with sex is going to evolve constantly as our body changes. So like having a sex talk again, as your, hormones are changing in your 20s and 30s. And then like, again, when you're going through perimenopause and having kids. And so it's like, there's so many versions of talking about sex and learning about it that we need to like keep having. It's not like this one and done thing.
I love right. Or even the framing as like the sex talk versus the ongoing life conversation. Yeah.
And also with your partners. Like I love that you keep talking about our changing bodies, Anita, because I find that to be so lacking in the ways that we frame how you talk about sex. It presumes, once you have a partner that you have decided what you want to do and you've talked about what you both like it's done. But like, I'm here to tell you, like, illness changes bodies, aging changes bodies, like weight gain, weight loss changes bodies, having a kid changes bodies, like, and you have to keep checking in. So what are you into now? Like
totally.
That needs to be the ongoing conversation.
Okay, well, great segue, Anna, to our next thread, talking about sex and bodies with partners and friends and kids and having hard conversations in these realms. One of my favorite parts of your book was you talking about reconnecting with your ex-husband, and making sense of the end of that relationship on your own, and then trying to make sense of it in conversation with him. Tell us about how that conversation came to be and what it was like to reconnect and have a conversation with an ex-partner, that went over some uncomfortable territory.
Yeah, I mean, it was intense and weird. I'm here to tell you. I was married to my first husband from the age of 26 until 30. We split up right as when I was 30 and divorced. And it's sort of like it's kind of like an overarching plot of the whole book, because I feel like that divorce for me was this moment in life where I was like, oh, I can't like study and work and work my way around through this hard thing and fix it. You know, like we did the couples counseling, we did all the books, you know, I went to church, I tried to find the like, what is this breakdown and how do we like apply the epoxy that's going to just like make it better. And I couldn't. And I found that to be like a really shameful experience of just like, you know, because so much of my identity was like, I am a person who makes commitments, and I'm a person who and keeps them, and I'm a person who prioritizes family. And so I couldn't like, how am I also going to be a divorced woman? Like, how does that all work together? And sort of like coming to like let that divorced woman self into my sense of identity, and like then being like, oh my gosh, there's all these other messy people around here that I want to know how they did that. How did they like do those moments of transition, and how did they, you know, find self-compassion when they didn't have answers, and how did they, you know, kind of like get through moments where there was no fixing a hard thing. It was incorporating this hard thing into the narrative of their life. That's what sort of led to Death, Sex, and Money and all my work since. So I got to as I was reporting this book, I was like, okay, Anna, like you can't like write about your divorce and like set yourself up as this like person who's like, you all really got to have the hard conversations. But I didn't talk to my ex-husband the entire time I was working on this book. So I, you know, early on, I was like, I'm writing about this. I'm going to share, you know, and I shared pages with him. And I also asked him to sit down with me, mostly because I was like, I was curious if he remembered the like conversation impasses that I did. Like, was there something that I didn't say, or that we looking back, because it was years later, like, was there something that I missed or I was too proud to grapple with? And what I found, it was both kind of, it was like you sort of sit down with your ex-husband and you expect to like really have this revelation and catharsis. And instead what it was like a complete confirmation of like, and of my memory of that time, which was we were kept coming up against the fact that we wanted different things. I wanted a family, I wanted a house, I wanted like stability, a certain model of I knew what I wanted my family and adulthood to look like. And he was going through this big change of becoming a filmmaker and wanting to just be not sort of hemmed in with those kinds of you know, strictures, and wanted to sort of embrace adventure. And we didn't want the same thing. And the sort of place that I came to at the end of the book was like, oh, those hard conversations at the time, I understood them as failures because they didn't fix the breakdown of our marriage. And now I understand them as sad conversations that were hard because what we were talking about was hard. And they led us to face the fact that we weren't gonna be together forever, even though we'd had this lovely time together and, you know, grew up together and we're best friends through our 20s and came of age together and loved each other. And I think that's really important to remember with conversations about sex. And, rejection. You have to, when you're talking about this stuff, there's the possibility that you're not going to agree at the end.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean you've done the conversation wrong. Sometimes that means you've done it right, because you're being more open about what you both want and need.
Yeah. That reminds me of the death chapter of your book. And like my biggest takeaway was just like, there's nothing that words can necessarily do to fix this except for to like support and soothe. And with the with relationships, like going in knowing that it might not end in like two people agreeing, but that's super scary, like going into a hard conversation knowing, okay, the result of this might be finding out that we don't want the same things. And just thinking about myself and like, conversations I have with friends, I feel like that's a lot of times like the thing that prevents us from having those hard conversations. Do you have advice? I know, looking for advice, but do you have advice for that?
No, I think it's really, because the whole thing with a relationship is like, this person is telling me something that is maybe not exactly what we're not fully aligned, but I have to figure out where my line is on how far I'm willing to compromise. And I think that there's a lot of usefulness of just like letting yourself be in the I don't know phase, like that was my whole thing when I got together with Arthur, my now husband. There were years we were dating and I was just like, I don't know if this makes sense. And I don't know if I'm ready to commit again. I don't know what we're doing. And he's so like he would say to me when we were first, like we were long distance and we were really like responding to each other. And he would just say, all you have to decide is if you want to talk to me tomorrow. You're not promising me anything. Like, and it was just like this permission to just be exactly where I was and to not need to race. Of course, I still did race ahead and be like, what am I doing? But, to just let yourself be like, I don't know, and sometimes those things are like, I don't know. I feel like I'm on a timeline. If I'm, if I want to have kids, like that was for me, I was in my early 30s. So I felt this like additional pressure to like reach some conclusions. But sometimes you just have to go through it before you know.
I feel like there's also like, I've been thinking a lot in the past year. I read the book by Anita Rao and Anne Friedman called Big Friendship. And it was so powerful and it hit me like at just the right moment because I'm in my early 30s. I have these friendships from college that are a decade old, some of which have fallen apart, some of which are still strong, but I'm entering this phase where people are more coupled and paired, and maintaining those deep, close friendships takes a lot of work. And when it's hard and when there are disruptions, we don't have a lot of models for how to have hard conversations with our friends. And I was going through some periods last year of like a few friendships that were so important to me that had these disruptions that I didn't know how to mend. And I read that book, and one of the most helpful metaphors in there is they talk about friendships having like there's a stretch. So like in other relationships, like, if you're in like a short, dating relationship and things aren't good, you stretch and then you're like, and we're breaking, like, goodbye, we're done. And in friendships where it's someone that is important to you, you stretch, but like you have to like choose to like keep stretching and repair. And then you might stretch again and repair versus like feeling that stretch means you should give up.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the hard line for me, is figuring out when these hard conversations are working toward a place where we can at least pause and then we can come back to this and we can like keep stretching, but to not give up and to like maintain, to know when to not give up, I guess, and to return back to the conversation.
Yeah. And then I will just say, I mean, I know that space so well. I also have known what happens when all of a sudden, and that feeling of like, I'm going to accept whatever this has been. Like, I know, like I'm done with this period of, not being clear. And then all of a sudden you're clear. You can't force it though. And that those hard conversations that aren't reaching the like answer though, that's what you're doing. You're doing that kind of like tending to the fire. Is this fire gonna like light back up, or is it just, I'm still poking at it over here, like, do I want to throw more gas on it? Like, and it's really, it's just like, you don't know. And then, and then it feels like you can finally put your shoulders down.
Allison, how have you had those hard conversations with friends? Do you have thoughts about hard friendship conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I actually did a story for a podcast I worked on for a couple of months called The Cut, about a friendship with my dear, dear friend Hannah. And she had moved, and like, she's the kind of friend that I like talk to about everything. But when she moved, I feel like I actually hadn't expressed to her how much it hurt me that she had moved. Because I didn't want to like hold her back. I didn't want like my being like, I wish you were here. I wish you never left New York City to bring her down. And, you know, so I decided to make a podcast episode about it.
As we do.
And what was really, and I think the fear that was, I think like fear drives a lot of these things. And I think the fear was that because she moved, we were no longer going to be like as close as we are. Like, she's just my person. She's my soulmate. She's the person I go to for everything. And that somehow by being far away, we were going to lose that in some way. And we ended up talking about it in a very serious way and like really analyzing our relationship and our friendship. And I think in that case, but I think there was also fear that like, maybe she also like wants some distance. Maybe we should like, moving is good. We can kind of be on our own, and also kind of coming up against these ideas of, should both of us just be like moving on? Or I think there's this weird thing where romantic relationships, it's acceptable to like arrange your life around them, especially in your 30s and 40s. But friendship, it's like, I don't know. I think this is changing, and there's a lot of people who are pushing against this norm, but it might be weird for me, but like, my best friend's moving, so I am too. I'm going with her.
Yeah.
But it was something I thought about and we talked about, and I just feel like we've defined our relationship as friends in a way that I've never done in like so explicit of terms. But I think that, you know, there's just as much unknown, like who knows if we'll ever live in the same place together. But I feel like we kind of made these commitments to each other that have, I think, super strengthened our friendship. Like after the episode came out, we talked about our friendship even more. And I'm going to visit her in a couple weeks now that we're both vaccinated.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. How do y'all, okay, I want to take the results of the poll in a second, but I love to ask y'all about like instincts during hard conversations. Oh, okay, wait, here we go. I can talk to my close friends about anything except, no exceptions, we talk about everything is big. My income and economic status, how I'm feeling about my body, my sexuality or sexual likes or dislikes.
Okay, I have a question for the audience. Just
yeah,
I'm curious, looking at the results of this poll, what the age demographic is, because I will say, as a 40-year-old, one of the big strange things in my friendships has been kind of making space for difference, like not having sameness. And I think what happened in my 30s, like people's career trajectories take different directions, so that their income changes in a way like that like is much different. I have friends with much different financial places than I did when I was more early career. And, you know, also people's life happens. And so as more difference becomes part of your friendships, I think it can be, I have found it's like that figuring out where the tender places are, it takes more effort because, you know, I don't know, like me living in Berkeley, California, like having a job with benefits, posting a podcast, and a husband who has a good career, like talking to a friend who hasn't had that kind of stability, like it's very easy to sound like the asshole friend when I'm complaining, you know, like, so I think that kind of figuring out the space for difference and acknowledging those differences, like naming them. Like, I know you're in a different place, so tell me if this, like, you've told me if you'd rather not I complain about this with you, just sort of, and then just kind of moving on is oh, cool. People are saying their ages in chat. Oh, here's a 40-year-old. Hi,
Your
Claire.
high school classmate. I love
Oh, Claire, hi.
the internet. Beautiful.
Amazing. So cool. So that is
Yes.
something I would say. Oh, and there's Anna asked 59 years. Anita's mom, 52.
Hey, Mom.
Okay.
My mom, happy birthday, Mom.
So
Turn.
it seems like I made a wrong assumption. It seems like we have a nice range.
Yeah.
And you all just have more open friendships than I do.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left. So if y'all have any burning questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. And I'd love to kind of end or this last chunk talking to y'all about like integrating what you've learned about hard conversations like into your actual body and into your kind of embodied, oh my gosh, into your embodied experience as a host of Embodied. But thinking about instincts, because I think one of the things that I love about being a journalist is, you know, the permission to ask questions when you have a microphone and creating space for people to talk openly. And I feel like I trust my instincts a lot more when I have a microphone in front of me. Like I trust where my curiosity is going, and can kind of stay with myself more in those moments than when I don't have a microphone. I sometimes feel a little bit more flaily in hard conversations. Like, I don't know what I don't know if my instincts are telling me the right thing. Should I push a little bit more here or should I back off? So I'd love to hear from y'all about like instincts in hard conversations, on and off the microphone, and what you think about that.
Do you want to go ahead, Allison? I have some.
Well, I just have one comment, which
Yeah.
I feel like it's a safe, like the journalist mindset is kind of a safe space in hard conversations. And I think
Yes.
sometimes I go into like, from first dates to like hard conversations with people, I kind of go into question asking mode and like trying to pull out, you know, the good tape, what I need from this person. But yeah, that's my one response. I don't really have much more
Yeah.
to add to that. I think that's so true.
I think I have really found that doing this work as a journalist, I think has made me, I'm better. I was good at it first as a journalist before I was good at it in life. Like, and I'm not, I'm still working on it a lot in life. But it's not just us. I was just talking to Dan Savage about this, and he said that sometimes his husband will say to him in the middle of a conflict, he'll say, "Oh, what would Dan Savage say to you right now?" You know, like the space between your persona and your actual self in a hard conversation. But I think I would distill like the things that I've really like learned from doing this work is like, oh, when I give myself an assignment for work to do this hard conversation or to reach out or to start this conversation, I will do it. So I need to give myself those assignments in my real life and really hold myself to it, you know? The other thing I've really learned is like, you know, when you're a radio maker, you are so inclined to like your deep listening self is who is present because you are listening for the follow-up, you're listening for the words. When I'm in a conflict or a heated exchange with my husband, for example, that is not always the mode I'm in. I'm in the mode of like, is he agreeing with me or not? And if not, I'm going to battle back, you know? So how do I get back to that space of like pacing, of just like listening and curiosity? And even if I do disagree, then it's like, let me like really hear what you're saying. And then I will say like, okay, I'll even like do the repeat back. I hear you saying this, like, that's not, I actually have a different read on it, like da 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 da. So you're really trying to preserve that exchange. But you know, clearly when you're a podcast host who gets to edit what she makes, you are in control.
Exactly.
And that is not the case in hard conversations with people we love.
One question I had for both of you is, are there any topics that both of you feel really uncomfortable? Like of all the kind of categories, death, sex, money, family, like, is there one that you still struggle to talk about in a personal way?
I'll go.
Yeah,
You
go
wanna
for it.
go? Okay.
No, go.
To me, I think money has been my like anxious place always. So that's taken a lot of practice to like just own, oh, I'm feeling anxious because we're talking about money. Because I'm just like I'm just like a weird stability obsessive person to a fault. And then identity conversations have often been hard because I am often thinking like, do I get to ask this question? Is this the way I want to ask this question? Like, what's my role in this conversation? But I will say, like, I kind of, with so much practice, like, when you give yourself permission to narrate when you're approaching a part of the conversation where you're feeling a little bit out of your depth. And what I mean is to just say, like, I might be getting this wrong, but this is what I'm thinking. Like, is this how you would read it? Like, just narrating your uncertainty, it makes the idea of like a whole topic that's, totally stressful and you'd rather avoid, that kind of like becomes not the frame, because you can give yourself permission to sort of be like, okay, now I'm in a space of less certainty and I'm just going to tell you that. So let's have a conversation on you knowing that on those terms. Like, I don't know if I'm saying the right thing here, or like, let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think for me, it's also like identity and race. I think that's a space where I feel much more comfortable talking to friends, because I feel like they know where I'm coming from. Like, I'm mixed race, but I present as white. And sometimes I wonder in conversations around race and identity, if someone hears what I'm saying from the perspective that I feel like it's from, which is like having some kind of shared experience in some way, or whether they're not hearing that. And so I think I've learned, we did an episode about transracial adoption earlier this year. And one of the transracial adoptees had a blog and they wrote a whole post, and I had been like writing my questions in preparation for this interview, and so much of what they'd written in their blog, I felt so much kinship with, like being in a space where, you feel very comfortable and not comfortable at the same time. You feel like you fit in, but you don't feel like you fit in. And then I came across a post that they wrote that was all about like why mixed race people shouldn't think that they know what transracial adoptees feel. And I was like, shit. It's like, okay, this whole line of questioning, now I'm seeing all the ways in which it's really problematic. And now I have to really like rethink how I'm going to ask these questions. So I think it's about that like vulnerability of like, part of me was like, no, it's okay for me to be vulnerable about like, these are I have and I want to relate to because I have this shared experience, but also not trying to make it seem like we have the same experience, and talking through that uncertainty in real time and being willing to verbalize it, even when it feels like not very elegant, is something that it's still uncomfortable, but I feel like I'm trying to practice doing it more.
Did you tell that you had that experience of reading the blog post?
Of reading the blog, I think off air, but not on.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So because my additional challenge is we record all of our episodes live for the radio show. So I don't have like the tape is rolling, the tape is not rolling experience as much, which makes it kind of harder sometimes to develop that like pre-taping rapport.
Yeah.
Yeah. Allison, do you have thoughts to your own question?
Well, I do. I mean, I think that one thing that's cool with a lot of people that I surround myself with is we like good body positivity stuff. It's like we eat food that we like. We don't say, oh, that I'm so bad for eating that second slice of pizza like that. Those aren't conversations that really happen with my group of friends, which I really appreciate. And I feel like it's my friend group that has kind of enlightened me in a lot of ways to like what it means to feel good about yourself and your body. And so we just never said those things. But then there was this one moment where I was like, I'm not really feeling great in my body. I'm like having these bad feelings about myself. I need to talk to someone. But it felt like I almost couldn't share it with one of my friends because like, we don't have this negative, like we don't think that way in our group. But it was good. Like I kind of talked to her about it, and like she shared some of her own things, and it was just nice to like give air to those things than to kind of like let them evaporate. But kind of navigating that line of like, we don't talk bad about our bodies in this group of friends, but also like making space so that it's okay to like air those things.
It's also, it's like some of these conversations, these hard conversations are like not one and done, like especially around like bodies and body image. Like we're going to probably have that conversation 100 more times. And like, that's okay. Even though it feels, sometimes I feel like, oh my God, you haven't learned from like the past 100 times you had that conversation. Like, it's okay to keep having it.
Yeah,
There's
and
I think there's also a difference between like intellectually, like knowing it, like, oh, I know this, but I don't yet feel it and I need some help feeling it right now.
Yeah, that reminds me of this thing that the scholar Peggy McIntosh told me when I interviewed her for the book. She wrote My Invisible Backpack about white privilege back in the 80s. She wrote this piece about all the ways white privilege shows up in her life. And she said that the one way that she has learned to sort of like voice, she's like, look, we are educated and grow up in these systems that teach us to be racist, sexist, classist, et cetera. And she's like, and that is my hard drive. And I have these instincts that are part of my hard drive. And I need to acknowledge that they're there. So then I can say, I'm going to pull on my alternative programming here and kind of like correct it. But like the hard drive is there. So she's like, you got to acknowledge you're having these thoughts, and it's because of the systems in which we grew up. And I really thought that was useful to be like, oh, I'm not bad for having this thought. I'm going to acknowledge that I have this thought that I want to change the framework for in my mind, but they're both inside of me and inside of my emotions and my reactions.
I love that. Okay, we have 1 minute left. We can get the poll results. And then the last question in the Q&A for y'all is, someone said, I've ingested work from all three of you and I'm always so moved. What media related to these topics have inspired you? Other podcasts, books, TV, et cetera. Where can we learn more about having difficult conversations? So while you're thinking about that, I'll share the poll results. Okay, what tools do you use most often when it's time to have a hard conversation? 13% of people, internet wisdom. 50% a practice run through with someone else. 31% a lot of soft pedaling ahead of the difficult parts. 6% liquor. This is great. I'm with you with the practice run and internet. Actually, all of these.
Yeah.
Yes, I co-wrote this poll, so I identify with all of these.
Always do the practice run.
These are all tools I use. Okay, Anna and Allison, any media related to having hard conversations, books, TV, et cetera?
The first thing I thought was therapy. You know, it's really useful to have a place to practice naming things and getting in touch with what the feelings actually are before you have to pull on them in a hard conversation. I'm really, speaking of therapy, I'm very into couples therapy right now on Showtime. Season 2 is very good. I like it better than season 1 even. Yeah. I also just like taking in stuff about clumsy main characters because it just gives me permission to be more than one thing.
I love that. Allison?
Oh man, I wish I had a specific recommendation to make. I mean, truly, both of you have been, I gain a lot from listening to both of you. So thank you. And if you don't listen to Death, Sex, and Money and Embodied, you should.
There you go. The only media you need is our 3 shows.
It's true.
Totally. Gosh, do I have a recommendation? I think mine, this is like kind of a cop-out, but maybe not, is reading fiction and like being very present with what I'm consuming, I think is step 1. Like, consume fewer things and be very present with them is the lesson I've learned over and over and over again. So like really listening to a podcast and like putting it away and actually thinking about what I got out of it has been the best way for me to think about how to actually like integrate those lessons about hard conversations or hard topics into my life versus just like moving on and being like very input oriented. So that's a big one. I think I listen to a lot of podcasts and think about how people talk and try to like let myself integrate that. And reading good fiction with like diverse, interesting protagonists, and like learning from them about how they see the world is a big part of, I guess, helping me think about how to have hard conversations. I've been reading Octavia Butler in the past year, for the first time, like when I feel like I actually understand what she's writing. I read it too young. And that's been good and helpful for me.
That's cool.
Well, thanks so much to both of you, and thanks to everyone who joined us.
Yeah, thank
you.
you.
Yeah, y'all have been awesome. You will get a recording of this, and feel free to share it with anyone who couldn't RSVP. We're going to continue these conversations on all of our podcasts, so make sure to subscribe to Embodied, Death, Sex, and Money, and the Bodies podcast. Go check out Anna's book, Let's Talk About Hard Things, and have a wonderful day. Thanks so much, y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.